Right, where are we going next? Watching the weather wars going on globally currently, and also a series of flooding events on the middle and eastern sides of this country, whilst the western side remains largely in drought-like conditions and some extreme drought conditions, I came up with an idea and a solution. And one of the things that amazes me is how long flooding remains in place in certain regions, and yet we have the drought conditions that is less than an oil pipeline away. Now the solution is you have a fleet of trucks with large tanks and pumps that would suck up the excess water and enable flooded regions to start the recovery quicker. The trucks can then dump the excess water into vast tanks to be transported and dumped into the Colorado River system that feeds several states who are suffering droughts and need the much needed water. So there are two solutions for this. Either the fleet of trucks drive there to deposit the water, or we build pipelines across the country to transport the excess water to the Colorado River or other rivers in the region to replenish it. Now, the argument by the system is it would be too costly, but everything that is beneficial to the public appears too costly to them, despite the money spent belonging to the people. So if doing something of value for the people is too expensive and so not valid, then perhaps we need a closer look at government costs, military costs, and agency costs as well, as they are not valid or fit for purpose as it stands. But this would solve some of the water issues. Given the abuses of the medical fraternity imposed on the people over the past year or so, and in relation to the COVID bioweapon, but also the fact that the third leading cause of death in America is medical malpractice, perhaps it is time for we the people to make future hospitals be called care and cure centres, and staff implement an oath that has long since expired called the Hippocratic Oath. Now, the Hippocratic Oath is perhaps the most widely known of Greek medical texts, and it requires a new physician to swear upon a number of the healing gods that he will uphold a number of professional ethical standards. And it also strongly binds the student to his teacher and the greater community of physicians with responsibilities similar to that of a family member. And in fact, the creation of the oath may have marked the early stages of medical training to those outside the first families of the Hippocratic medicine, the Asclepiads of Kos, by requiring strict loyalty to the oath. Now, over the centuries, it has been rewritten often in order to suit the values of different cultures influenced by Greek medicine. And contrary to popular belief, the Hippocratic Oath is not required by most modern medical schools, although some have adopted modern versions that suit many in the profession in the 21st century. It also does not explicitly contain the phrase, "first do no harm," which is commonly attributed to it. Perhaps it needs to be added back in. So, this is the Hippocratic Oath. I swear by Apollo, the physician, and Asclepius and Hygeia, which could be where the term hygienic comes from, and Panacea, and all the gods and goddesses as my witness that according to my ability and judgment I will keep this oath and this contract. To hold him who taught me this art equally dear to me as my parents, to be a partner in life with him, and to fulfill his needs when required, to look upon his offspring as equals to my own siblings, and to teach them this art, if they shall wish to learn it, without fee or contract, and that by the set rules, lectures, and every other mode of instruction, I will impart a knowledge of the art to my sons and those of my teachers, and to students bound by this contract, and having sworn this oath to the law of medicine, but to no others. I will use those dietary regimens which will benefit my patients according to my greatest ability and judgment, and will do no harm or injustice to them. And here's a more modern day oath that needs requiring. I will not give a lethal drug to anyone if I am asked, nor will I advise such a plan, and similarly I will not give a woman a pessary to cause an abortion. In a purity and according to divine law, I will carry out my life and my art. I will not use the knife even upon those suffering from stones, but I will leave this to those who are trained in this craft. Into whatever homes I go, I will enter them for the benefit of the sick, avoiding any voluntary act of impropriety or corruption, including the seduction of women or men, whether they are freemen or slaves. Whatever I see or hear in the lives of my patients, whether in connection with my professional practice or not, which ought not to be spoken of outside, I will keep secret, as considering all such things to be private. So as long as I maintain this oath faithfully and without corruption, may it be granted to me to partake of life fully, and the practice of my art, gaining the respect of all women and men for all time. However, should I transgress this oath and violate it, may the opposite be my fate. Something perhaps we need to reconsider. Now, divine law and truth, which is mentioned in there, is called Rita. R-I-T-A. That is the real name of divine law and truth, not common or natural. But what is interesting about this is the only god of the past that visited Aria or Hyperborea was Apollo, the original solar god and possibly the Logos, before the intervention of the Egyptian, Israeli, Pharaoh, Cohen's, Hebrew Anunnaki and the cult of Ra took over. Apollo was the healer, in part oracle and visionary, and was clearly held in high esteem and vibration to go to Aria, something none of the other god or goddesses achieved. Now, to the maths people in Texas, Pythagoras also swore by Apollo as well. The number 3, which we discussed at length over the weekend, was an ideal number because it had a beginning, a middle, and end, and was the smallest number of points that could be used to define a plane triangle, plane spelt Plane, which they revered as a symbol of the god Apollo. Perhaps one-on-one with the one is the triangle. The gods and the goddesses. Oh my. How many of them did fall? Largely on their own sword. But what does that mean, falls on their own sword? Well, this plays into the self-mastery and the allegory story of King Arth of Ur and the Excalibur story. It is not a physical stone or sword. The swords you acquire in Dreamtime missions are not physical either, but you can defend yourselves with them and protect yourself in those realms. So for those who have attained the inner non-physical sword within, unless you exhibit ultimate personal responsibility on that level, you will fall on your own sword. Now, the sword is attained by merging the two warring hemispheres of your brain, merging it with the third eye, and when ready, the blade forms to the heart. Now, two things make this development stall or stop. One, the blocking of the throat chakra, and two, the heart is made of stone, just like the Excalibur legend. The sword becomes wedged because the heart is made of stone. The heart is where your real development comes from. It has more neurons than the brain. It is where wisdom and intellect comes from. Intelligence is a brain-mind development and can be taught to anyone. Intellect comes from the heart and is much higher in vibration, stimulus, frequency, thinking, and positive actions. Those with their swords wedged in the heart can no longer defend with their sword. The sword is a double-edged blade, and if it can't defend, it can only cut you. If you cut yourself too much, and it happens at a faster pace now, you will quickly see that person falling and cutting themselves to ribbons internally. Those people will no longer make sense, as the death by 1,000 cuts is unfolding from within and eventually externally. Now, the death of 1,000 cuts originated in China called Ling Chi and was a torture tactic until it was banned in 1905. A slow death by the torture of many small wounds, non-lethal in itself, but fatal in their cumulative effect. And it's like termite damage. It eats from within, and only when it becomes severe do you see the damage externally. This can only be fixed at an early stage, as each cut causes more internal bleeding on a different plane of existence. If not dealt with early by the person themselves, ultimately they will die the death of 1,000 cuts and ultimately fall on their own sword. I received further deeply damning evidence this week on the ongoing sagas of the Life Force group. And I could have put it in the show and presented it. But I've decided that flogging a dead horse is no longer on my vibration, and neither should it be. They are consuming themselves with or without my input. I tried many times to help or save, but you can't help or save people who will not help or save themselves. THI nor TPC is not a saviour program of one leader. It is a multi-leader self-saving project to improve everyone's lives. We project ourselves into a brighter future, not use the old loop movie projector that always was repeated in, of and from the past. Only criminals, losers and psychopaths want to change the past. Higher vibrational thinking and people observe the past, learn the lesson and chart a better future path. The former categories absorb the past and so becomes their perpetual now and future until it's addressed. To build a new platform for humanity in a way that does not include copying the failed old system, their failed old ways, and their failed old worlds. And this requires input from you all. I will not do it all for you. But think of how much energy we fritter away. And think of how, where and what is best to re-divert that energy to a better cause for the TPC and ultimately yourself also. Imagine if money was oxygen and breathable and subsequently observable. Think of how the world would change overnight if that was the case. If your level of money was counted in terms of oxygen to breathe, I wonder how many would die overnight for the lack of oxygen. Would you still collect it like it's going out of fashion, or learn to share it? There is a plenty for people's needs, but never enough for people's greed. But ponder on how much of your frequency and energy is frittered away on a daily basis, arguing with people, fighting with people, raging at people or groups, people watching mind-controlled TV, and worse, news channels. Now imagine if that same energy was applied into fixing the failed old system and building a new. We don't have to fight them for that. We just have to raise our own frequencies, and they can't sustain it. As if we didn't have enough ongoing, me in particular, I have conceived of a new idea in part, inspired by the TPC Texas group and in particular Kevin. And I thought of the 2 TPC videos that laid out my vision for us all, but I never wanted it for it to be all about me. And that's why I tasked Alan and Liam to compile and narrate part 3, until they decided to sit in restaurants and wait for the carrots programme was more to their liking than working for the better cause themselves. And that's their choice, and we have to honour it. So I have envisioned a new TPC video that will last 2 hours and will involve as many THI members as possible. I'm thinking 20 to 30 members doing 2 to 3 minute pieces on the concept of the TPC and also explaining the virtues or teachings of the communal gatherings. A promotional video about the TPC and why people should join it and come together as one, espousing the ideas of why we have to be and are different from all the rest, how we are the blueprint for a new humanity and a new way of living, working and playing together in a peaceful world. I'm looking for people of differing age groups, people of all colours, both genders, people from different countries also, to create the diversity with which we go forward with. I will ask Michael to add another communal gathering for those of you who wish to participate in this. And we're going to need ideas on the topics discussed. We need writers to compile the speeches for the 20 to 30 segments, which will be 2 to 3 minutes each. And we need names put forward for those who wish to speak in the video, and it may be a mixture of video or audio recordings. Now, Kevin Yockey will be the video coordinator for the final recording, but first we must build the concept in our image and in our own unique way. That's the new TPC. A word on the TPC Community Village. It is a blank slate concept, and some may be disappointed with its appearance, region and or the location. The ones who have visited so far haven't. They've liked it. But it's not a tropical paradise, it's not a lush green area, and it's not filled with expensive houses, and will not be a status symbol home or region. But what it represents, though, is an opportunity to transmute, a blank slate for you to create in the image you wish to see. And it, in essence, encompasses us all. And like us, it requires work. It requires a bit of effort, it requires vision, and requires change to transform it and yourselves. It starts from humble beginnings. The prices are suitable to be accessible to the many, not the few, which is a reversal of their world. It aspires to the TPC model of need, not greed. And if we care and share with it in a cooperative way, not comparative or competitive, it will become our foundation and base from which to build. Build it and they will come. But here is a few lines from a song that describes our venture and journey. It takes one step to start a journey. It's up to you to make it real. This is the time for yourself to be free. You've got to follow your heart. This is the time in your life, and it's never too late to see the light in the dark. you've got to follow.